The day my daughter-in-law decided she was in charge, she was wearing my late wife's pearl earrings. I noticed them the moment she walked into my living room, the same room where Maggie and I had raised our son, celebrated 38 Christmases, and argued exactly once about whether to keep the cottage in Muskoka. Nicole had been helping herself to Maggie's jewelry box for 3 weeks at that point, ever since the funeral. I hadn't said a word. I was still too hollowed out to say much of anything. That particular Tuesday morning, my son arrived just behind his wife, coffee in hand from the Tim Hortons down the road. One for himself, none for me. He sat in the armchair closest to the door, which I'd always thought of as a habit of someone who wasn't planning to stay long. Nicole sat across from me at the dining room table, folded her hands together like she was about to lead a board meeting, and smiled. Not warmly, not the way someone smiles in a house that still smells of grief. She smiled the way people smile when they've already decided how things are going to go. "Dad," she began. She'd taken to calling me that after Maggie died, which I found extraordinary given that in 15 years of marriage, she had never once called me anything warmer than Robert. We've been thinking a lot about the future, about what makes sense for everyone. I wrapped both hands around my mug and waited. "The company," she said, "needs younger leadership. Daniel is ready. You know that. You've always known that." My son, to his credit, looked slightly uncomfortable in his chair. He didn't say anything. Connelly Sons Mechanical had been my life's work. I'd started it from a single service van in Barrie when my son was 4 years old. Built it into one of the most respected HVAC and plumbing contractors in Simcoe County. 72 full-time employees, contracts with 3 municipalities. Maggie had handled the books for the first 12 years, working evenings at the kitchen table while our son did his homework beside her. When I said the company was my life's work, I meant it almost literally. It had cost us something. It had also given us everything. "I'm 63, I said. "Exactly," Nicole said, as if that settled it. She went on. She'd thought through the structure, she told me. The company would transfer to my son's name, in full. I would receive a monthly draw, she called it a retirement allowance. Though she might as well have said pension and spared us both the euphemism of $4,000 a month drawn from the company's operating account. The house on Penetanguishene Road would go on the market, as it was too large for one person, and the proceeds could be reinvested more productively. The Muskoka cottage would be kept for now, for the family to use, meaning, I understood clearly, for Nicole's family. My son stared at his coffee. "What about my RRSP?" I asked. "My personal investments?" Nicole glanced at him briefly, then back at me with that same patient boardroom expression. "Those are yours, of course. But the cottage was purchased using company funds in 2009. So that technically falls under business assets. We had a friend who's a paralegal look it over." "A paralegal?" She had sent a paralegal after my cottage. I nodded slowly. I said I needed some time to think about all of this. Nicole said she understood completely, and that she and my son just wanted what was best for everyone, and I believe she actually meant it, in the way that certain people genuinely cannot distinguish between what is best for themselves and what is best for everyone. They left. I sat in the dining room until the winter light went flat and gray through the windows, and then I picked up the phone and called Patricia. Patricia Walsh had been my lawyer for 21 years. She had drawn up Maggie's will, restructured the business incorporation twice, helped me buy out my original partner in 2007, and once talked me out of a lawsuit that I would have won, and that would have cost me far more than I'd have recovered. She was 71 years old, had argued cases before the Ontario Court of Appeal, and had a voice like a woman who had never once in her life been talked over in a meeting. When I told her what Nicole had proposed, there was a long pause. "Robert," she said, "how soon can you come in?" I drove to her office in Barrie the next morning. I want to be honest about something. I was not angry when I made that drive. I was something quieter and colder than anger. Maggie had been gone for 6 weeks. I had watched my son sit in my armchair and drink his coffee and not say a single word while his wife told me I would be receiving a monthly allowance from my own company. And the thing that stayed with me, the thing I couldn't shake loose, was that it wasn't the greed that broke something in me. It was recognizing that my son had known this was coming. He'd known, and he had brought a coffee for himself. Patricia had the documents spread across the conference table when I arrived. She had a yellow legal pad with handwritten notes and a look on her face that I recognized from the 2007 partnership dispute, measured, precise, and privately furious on my behalf. Before we talk about Nicole's proposal, she said, "Let's talk about what's actually in place." She walked me through it. 4 years earlier, on the advice of my accountant, Maggie and I had moved the company into a family trust structure. It was a fairly standard estate planning measure for a business of our size, the kind of thing Patricia had been recommending for years, and the kind of thing we'd finally done after a long conversation about succession and taxes and what we actually wanted to leave behind. Under that structure, Maggie and I were the trustees. Upon Maggie's passing, I became sole trustee, with the authority to designate beneficiaries going forward. The cottage, Patricia explained with some satisfaction, had been purchased through my personal holding company in 2008. Not the operating company, and not in 2009. Nicole's paralegal had gotten the year wrong and the entity wrong. It was not a business asset. It had never been a business asset. "Now," she said, setting down her pen, "there's something else I think you should know." I had hired Patricia's firm to do a full review of the company's financials the previous autumn, after Maggie got her diagnosis. It was partly estate planning, partly just wanting everything clean and accounted for. Patricia's associate had found something in the accounts payable records. Small amounts, at first vendor invoices that didn't match purchase orders, reimbursement claims for expenses that couldn't be traced to actual work. Over 14 months, totaling just over $38,000. The signatory on all of them was Nicole. My son had brought her into the company 3 years ago in an administrative capacity. She had access to a secondary expense account, approval authority up to $5,000 per transaction, and apparently the confidence of someone who assumed she would be the one reviewing her own records eventually. I sat with that information for a long moment. "Does she know we found this?" I asked. "No one outside this office knows," Patricia said. "I was waiting to discuss it with you. I want to tell you something about who I was before that meeting and who I was after it. Before, I think I'd been operating on a kind of grief-stunned generosity, telling myself that Nicole was difficult, that she and my son had their own pressures, that whatever she took from Maggie's jewelry box and whatever she said at that dining room table was coming from somewhere complicated and human that I didn't fully understand. I am a mechanical contractor from Barrie, Ontario. I am not, by nature, someone who assumes the worst of people." After Patricia slid that spreadsheet across the table to me, I sat quietly for a long time and thought about my wife lying in a hospital bed at Royal Victoria, and Nicole sitting 3 chairs away from her, and the company that Maggie and I had built together, and the $38,000, and the pearl earrings. "When can we schedule a meeting?" I asked. Patricia smiled. It was not a warm smile. "I already had my assistant reach out to your son this morning. I told him it was time to discuss the estate and the business succession formally. He and Nicole confirmed for Thursday at 2. I nodded. "Robert," she said, "do you want to know what you're walking into? Or do you want to just walk in?" I thought about it. "I want to walk in," I said. Thursday arrived the way February days in Barrie do, pale and still. The kind of cold that doesn't announce itself, but simply settles into your coat on the walk from the parking lot. Patricia's boardroom was warm. Someone had set out a tray of coffee and water glasses. Nicole was already there when I arrived, seated at the far end of the table with her own leather notebook open in front of her, pen uncapped, as if she'd come to take minutes. My son sat beside her. He looked tired. He looked like a man who had not been sleeping well and had convinced himself this was the weather. "Thank you both for coming," Patricia said, taking her seat at the head of the table. Nicole set down her pen with a small, precise movement. "Of course. We've been looking forward to getting this sorted out. Robert, I know this process isn't easy, and Daniel and I just want to make sure everything is clear and fair." I said nothing. I looked at my son. He looked at the table. Patricia opened her binder. "Let's start with the company structure. because I think there may be some misunderstanding about what's actually in place. She walked them through the trust. She explained, without particular drama, that the Connelly Sons operating company was held within a family trust, that I was the sole trustee, that the designation of beneficiaries was entirely at my discretion, and that no transfer of ownership could occur without my formal consent as trustee. Nicole made a note. That's a formality though, isn't it? I mean, the intention was always for Daniel to— It's not a formality, Patricia said pleasantly. It's the legal structure. The intention is whatever Robert decides it is. Nicole looked at me. I looked back at her. I thought about the pearl earrings, which she was not wearing that day. The cottage, Patricia continued, is held in Robert's personal holding company, 1847392, Ontario Incorporated, registered in 2006 and wholly owned by Robert. It is not a company asset and was not purchased with company funds. It is not subject to any succession arrangement unless Robert chooses to make it so. My son looked up for the first time. Wait, Nicole said that a paralegal— The paralegal was mistaken, Patricia said. Understandably so. These structures can be complicated. That's why it's important to have a proper review. Nicole's pen had gone still on the notepad. She was looking at Patricia with the expression of someone who has come to a meeting expecting to collect a check and has discovered, midway through, that the teller's window is closed. Now, Patricia said, and she set a separate document on the table and slid it toward the center, equidistant between all of us. There's an additional matter we need to address. I watched my son's eyes move to the document. I watched Nicole's eyes do the same. Patricia explained, in the same measured, unhurried tone she used for everything, what the audit had found. She named the amounts, she named the dates, she named the account. She did not raise her voice. She didn't need to. The room was very quiet. The heating system clicked on somewhere in the building, a sound I would normally not have noticed. But in that silence it was distinct. That's Nicole started. $38,420, Patricia said. Over 14 months. We have the documentation for all of it, including the original purchase orders that were not matched. My son turned to look at his wife. I watched that happen. I had been dreading it, in a distant way. For weeks, that moment of my son's face reorganizing itself around a new understanding of his life. It is not a good thing to watch, even when the person responsible for it is the one sitting beside him. He was my boy. He learned to ride a bike in the driveway of the house on Penetanguishene Road. He called me at midnight from his college dorm once because he'd failed an exam and didn't know how to tell his mother. Whatever he had become in the years since, and I accept some responsibility for how those years went, he was still that. Daniel, I said. It was the first thing I'd said in 40 minutes. I'm not here to destroy anything. I want you to understand that. He looked at me. He looked very young. But I need you to also understand what's been happening. And I need you to understand that this company, everything your mother and I built, is not something I am prepared to hand over on the terms that were described to me 3 weeks ago in my own dining room. Nicole found her voice. Robert, those expenses were all legitimate. There was overhead. There were costs that weren't being tracked properly. I was streamlining— Nicole, Patricia said quietly. I'd encourage you to speak with your own legal counsel before saying anything further on that topic. She stopped. Patricia turned to my son. The question of what Robert chooses to do with this information, whether this becomes a legal matter or is resolved privately, is entirely his. He has not made a decision. I looked at my son. I haven't, I said. I'm not going to make that decision today. What I am going to do is tell you both, clearly, how things stand. I told them. The company would remain in the trust. I would continue to serve as trustee for as long as I chose to. I was prepared to bring my son in as general manager with a proper employment contract. A competitive salary I named. A number that was fair. Significantly less than he'd have received as owner, and significantly more than he deserved at that particular moment, and a clear, written succession plan that would transfer ownership to him over time, contingent on performance and on certain other conditions that Patricia would document. He could take that offer or leave it. If he left it, I would be hiring a general manager from outside the family, and the succession plan would be revised accordingly. The cottage would remain mine. Nicole would resign her administrative role immediately, with a separation package that Patricia had already calculated. Whether the $38,000 became a civil matter or a private repayment arrangement was something I would decide over the next 30 days, during which time I expected to see a full accounting of every transaction she had processed. "And the house?" Nicole asked. Her voice had lost most of its texture. "Is mine?" I said. "It was always mine. I built it. My son left with his wife, and I stayed behind in Patricia's boardroom for a while, drinking the cold coffee and looking out the window at the parking lot. Patricia sat across from me without speaking, which I appreciated. There are people who know when silence is what's needed, and she had always been one of them. "How are you doing?" she asked eventually. "I don't know yet," I said. That was in February. By April, my son had started in the general manager role. He was not graceful about it at first. There were weeks of stiff formality between us, conversations that felt like they were happening through a layer of insulation. But he came to the shop floor. He asked questions. He sat across from me at the lunch table sometimes and didn't say much, and I didn't push. And slowly it began to feel less like insulation and more like the way things needed to be rebuilt slowly, with proper materials, without forcing the joints. Nicole repaid the money over 12 months through a private arrangement. There was no legal proceeding. I made that decision for my son, not for her. She took a position with a real estate firm in the city, and I understand she is competent at it. People who are good at acquiring things generally have useful skills. It's the judgment about when to stop that causes the trouble. The cottage is mine. I've been up there 4 times this year already. Once with my son, just the 2 of us. His first time there without Nicole. We didn't talk much. We fished badly and ate well and watched the sun go down over the lake the way it does in May. That long northern dusk that seems to last for hours. Maggie used to say that Muskoka at sunset was the closest she'd ever come to understanding the point of being alive. I think about her every day. I think about the 38 years we built together, the company and the house and the kid who turned out imperfect in ways we both had a hand in. I think about the fact that she never knew what Nicole had been doing. Or maybe she did. In that way Maggie had of knowing things she didn't say aloud, filing them quietly away for later. I'll never be certain of that. What I know is this. She built something worth protecting. And she had the foresight, even at the end of her life, to sit with Patricia and make sure it was protected properly, the trust, the structure, the careful, quiet architecture of everything we'd spent our lives making. Maggie always said I was the one people saw, the one who shook hands and made the pitch and drove the van at 4 in the morning when a furnace failed in January. But she was the one who made sure, when I came home, there was something solid to come home to. I keep the pearls in the box on her dresser. Some days I walk past and just look at them. Some days I don't. The lake is cold in the mornings this time of year. Cold the way Canadian lakes get cold, not hostile, just serious. The kind of cold that asks you a question and waits to see if you'll answer it. I go in anyway. I always have.